Hi, Miss Butt here with part 2 with our class text. Do you remember what happened so far? Pause the video and tell someone in the room, your teddy bear, or anyone that would listen, what's happened so far. And remember, the runes are a secret you guys have to uncover. The runes were in the beginning of the last video, so I hope you've noted it down because you will be solving a investigation of yourselves. Right, so let's start with chapter 2, Hidden in Plain View. If you notice, there is another rune in the middle of the mountain. So let's start. As the dense forest thinned out, a wall of stone reared up. Out of the gloom, Alva and Fenrir reached a circular clearing, tucked beneath a huge crag in the mountainside. A snake of smoke hovered in the center, creeping out of the embers of a dying fire. They were here! Alva felt her heart beat faster again, this time in excitement. Well done, Fen, she said, ruffling the wolf's head. You got us here, and we're first on the scene. Alva looked across the clearing, adjusting her vision to the half-light. Now she must swoop like an eagle, scanning the ground. Her sharp eyes must pick out the clues, if they were to solve the mystery announced by the stranger in Jarl's hall tonight. Until her uncle was still locked in conversation with Jarl Erik, carefully navigating traditions and expectations, she would be first to test the truth of the monk's tale. The whole village would be amazed by her skills, and her uncle and mother would be drawn together in their celebration of her. No longer would Brianna accuse Magnus of filling her head with useless riddles. She could just imagine them all huddled around the table, laughing, and her uncle telling her how quick and clever she was. At the edges of the sputtering fire, Alva could make out 2 flattened patches where the men had slept. She walked over slowly and crouched down. Charred bones lay strewn across the fire pit, where the leather drinking pouch was discarded nearby. They had eaten and drunk, then slept. She pressed herself closer to the ground. Alva had learned from Uncle Magnus that to be a true investigator meant you had to examine lots and lots of seemingly boring detail. If she was to be the best investigator in Kilsgard, she must look for clues, no matter how small or unimportant they may seem. She brushed the tangle of matted red hair out of her eyes and focused. There, in the bracken, a shard of white. Nothing extraordinary. A humble toothpick, but further evidence that the men had camped there. She carefully placed a slither of bone inside her pouch and turned towards the rear of the fire. Now there was something interesting. Where one of the men had slept, Alva could see that the ground was disturbed. Perhaps this was where the monk's companion had slept. She drew closer, and there, within the clump of soil, something bright and liquid shimmered. Was that blood? From there, 2 parallel lines, thin ridges of the wet earth, as if 2 hard objects had been dragged along the ground, ran off towards a clump of large shrubs nearby. She followed them and found another clue behind the bushes. Outlined in the dark earth. Hoof marks, the 2 drag lines stopped next to them. A body must have been dragged here and carried off on horseback. She would need Fen and his supernatural sense of smell to find the rider. Calling him to her side, Alva picked up a clump of earth from where the horse prints were deepest. She had trained Fenrir to follow scents since he was a cub. So held the soil on the wolf's nose and said, Fen, this is the new scent. Go and return. The wolf was gone in an instant. As Alva turned to survey the silent space, something else gleamed in the dim light. She missed it at first, but now she saw it, trodden into the soil. It gleamed white like the toothpick, but bigger and brighter. And unlike the toothpick, it had 4 edges, and about 2 fingers in length and 1 in width. It seemed to have been buried in the earth, crushed by the horse's hooves. Crawling in her hands and knees, she touched the surface. Smooth, creamy-coloured, made of bone, perhaps. Even in the darkness, she could see that the shapes and symbols were carved all over its surface. Was this the part of the casket? Running her hands gently around the edges, Alva prized it up from the ground. It was very thin, only the width of the smallest nail. Dusting the soil from the surface, her fingertips walked her way cautiously over the object. Runes. She could feel their outlines, the symbols that surrounded her life. Her father had tied a piece of carved runic bone around her neck the day she was born, and she wore it still. The single symbol, F, it meant Fihu, wealth or riches. Because of her parents, Alva was the greatest treasure of all. While her mother had treated her like a precious gemstone to be kept safe within the family chest, her father had seen his daughter as a jewel to be worn proudly, like a magnificent brooch. He wanted Alva to experience what he had experienced and see the world like he saw it. There were too many runes carved in this place for her to make sense of them. Holding it up to her eyes, she examined the object. It was a small, carved panel of bone. On one side, it was smooth, but on the other, a sequence of shapes and symbols were arranged in line. It carried a message. This must be part of the casket the monk had been translating what they had been following to find their treasure untold. A secret message leading to fortune. This was unbelievable, and Alva had been the one to find it. The English earl must have dropped this part of the casket as he was dragged away in the night. She had found the most important clue. What to do next, though? The heavy weight of realization sank to the bottom of her stomach. Uncle Magnus wouldn't be delightedly raising cups of mead at her discovery. He'd be furious when he'd realized he'd overheard his interrogation when Nen raced against a giant's finger. And the mother was terrified whenever Alva left the house. She already thought it was Magnus's influence that was driving the girl into dangerous situations. She would punish her, and Magnus would be so angry. As if thoughts were conjuring reality, Alva heard footsteps racing towards the clearing, and her uncle's gravelly voice riding to the wind. Simultaneously, a sharp, piercing cry shattered the airy silence of the clearing, and a heavy weight descended on her shoulder. Alva, bad! The shrill voice was right inside her ear. Alva reeled backwards, but she knew who it was. Graf, her uncle, all-seeing pet raven. Magnus had been training him for years, and he had been an ever-watchful presence in Alva's life, always following her, always seeing what the grown-ups couldn't. And that voice. Alva knew ravens were the cleverest of birds, sidekicks of the gods of wisdom, Odin. She also knew that some could learn to speak with a human voice, but Uncle Magnus had taught this blasted bird phrases designed to catch her out. Alva, bad! No, Alva, I see you! Alva, gone! Who needs the Norns when three goddesses who spun in strands of each person's life to twist your fate when you have a black sky rider to follow your every move? Why couldn't Alva's uncle trust her, like her father had? He would let her find her own adventures, but Magnus didn't like her being alone on her expeditions, and had this beady-eyed spy follow her. I see you, Alva, bad, Hrafn called out over and over as he whirled above the clearing. The footsteps picked up their pace, and Alva heard her uncle shout out in a confused voice, Are you there, girl? There's no point of hiding. The bird had found her. She walked over the remains of the fire, but not until she carefully and giddily tucked the piece of carved bone into her pouch, out of sight of Hrafn. I'm here, uncle, she said in the meekest voice she could muster. A group of men strode into the clearing. At the front of her was her uncle Magnus, who was not the tallest, almost impressive of Viking men, but he had a presence. While others had arms the size of tree trunks or beards, as thick as an oak in spring, Magnus was rather slight, and his beard was thin, wispy, and long, perfectly kept. Woven into its graying strands were gemstones and amulets Magnus had collected on his travels. Amber from Russia, amethyst from Constantinople, jet from England. While other Viking men wore their finest furs and decorated themselves in silver, he went everywhere in his traveling cloak, which, despite in many journeys, were clean as its day it was woven. He didn't have the eyes of a man set on heroism or battle, but clear blue pools that drew you in and made you think of the passing of the ages. Alva thought he was the most impressive man in Kilsgard. She loved him very much, particularly now her father was not there for her. But at this moment, Uncle Magnus was not looking at her kindly. Alva's stomach knotted around itself as he stared straight at her with those knowing blue eyes. Hrafn landed on his master's shoulders and clicked his beak angrily in her direction. Magnus took 3 large, deliberate steps towards his niece and grabbed her by the arm. Alva, he breathed in a low voice. What in the name of Odin are you doing here? This is the business of the Jarl. It's not for little girls to meddle in such matters. His grip on her arm tightened. Behind her uncle, she saw men in arms, the men of Jarl. Their axes glinted in half-light as they smiled in approval at Magnus's stern words to this reckless child. His arm hurt as he squeezed it, and she felt the pressure constrict in her chest. He loved her, she knew that, but he could get very angry with her when she broke away from her adventures. So sorry, uncle, Alva whispered. She caught his eye and mouthed at him, but I found clues, good clues. Magnus stared at her for a long moment. He then loosened his grip. Turning so, he was out of sight, and waiting for the cars, he gave her a slight smile. The conflicting sensation of fear and affection rushed through her. Was he proud, or was he livid with her? In an instant, he had returned to the role of a scolding father figure. It's only my niece, good men, he bellowed. She'll be reprimanded at home for her foolishness at once, being out on a night of danger. She'd been quite the reckless tearaway since Bjorn went to Viking. Go and wait for me over there, girl, he said, gesturing on the rocky wall at the back of the clearing. Right now, I must turn my attention to this place. Once again, Magnus's focus shifted. Alva had vanished from his mind, and in her place was a set of clues, winding round one another and forming the story. Krafft flew up into a tree and settled to preening himself. What does the word preening mean? You're not quite sure? Look it up in the dictionary. Alva was no longer their concern. The armed men leant against the trees and pulled drinking pouches from their belts. But while they eased themselves, her uncle narrowed his piercing eyes and began his own descent upon the rich treasure hoard of clues. If the monk's story is true, Magnus muttered, it will be written on the earth. Alva was always impressed by her uncle when he conducted his investigations. His calm, steady gaze never wavered, even as he touched his finger to the red liquid where Alva guessed the second man had slept. And as he followed the trail to the horse's prints, he showed no sign that anything was untoward. He was measuring everything, storing it in his mind hoard, collecting information like a magpie. What do you think the word man hoard means? Mind hoard. That's right, the brain. Throughout the process, he did not raise his eyes from the ground and ignored Alva completely. As he watched, he drew something from the worn leather bag slung around his waist. This bag had been across the seas to the edges of the world and back again. In it, Magnus stored many special devices he had acquired on his travels. He had navigation tools from the men in the desert, runestones from the Swedish seers, and writing implements from his time spent with monks. Now he was taking out his strange glass that made the things he saw through it twice their size. What would we call that thing? That's right, a magnifying glass. It fascinated Alva, but she was never allowed to touch it, as Magnus said it was the most precious and had come across sea and land to Kilsgard safely. One moment Alva's adventurous hands, and he worried its delicate transparent disc might meet its end. When in the past she had questioned him about it, Magnus had said, "There is wisdom in parts of the world that we know nothing of." He was always so elliptical, not like her father, who spoke to her and an adult from early as Alva could remember. She held back in the shadows near the rock face, nervously touching the piece of bone she had concealed in her own leather patch. She desperately wanted to tell Magnus she had found it. She wanted to pore over its symbols with him late into the night, and she would interrupt him now, not when he had looked for her with an expression like Thor's hammer had smashed him sideways. And besides, the cars were still there. Alva would have to wait. A noise reached her across the breeze. It was extremely quiet, but she recognized it at once. Fenrir, his howl came from the other side of the mountain ridge down by the water. Had he found something, her uncle, usually so quick-witted, was still focused on the ground, and the babble of the noisy cars had drowned out the wolf's howl. But she knew it was Ben, calling her. Her uncle and Harf couldn't care less about her right now, and she could creep away as long as she was silent. Slowly rounding to the back of the rock, Alva felt her way along its jagged edges. This really was unforgivable, to disobey her uncle twice in one evening, but Fenrir had followed the scent. Perhaps he was in danger right now, confronting the darker attacker alone. She must get to him. Once she had moved behind the rock, Alva saw that the horse's hooves had left a clear track, where they had churned up the earth. The prints were deep, which meant the horse had a heavy load. Fenrir call cut through the air a second time, and Alva quickened her step towards it. Soon she was running down the side of the giant's finger, trying not to stumble on the steep incline. Through the blanket of trees, she could just make out the banks of the river below, sparkling in the moonlight. A few more paces, and her shoes crunched the familiar sound of the bay beneath her soles. Alva had visited this shore many times in her life. The river was shallow there and carved the rocky bed, where ancient pictures images of ships and her ancestors of runes. Who knew how old they were? Surely they were put there when the giant still lived in Kilsgard. Her father had brought her here before he'd left to go a Viking the last time, and together they had woven stories around these pictures. He had told her that he had to go away, but she should always come back here if she wanted to be close to him. It was a special place for her. Fenrir ran to meet her. He was not alone. No horse, no rider, no lost English warrior. She could see that the horse's hooves went as far as the water's edge and then disappeared. Clever, Alva thought. The rider knows Kilgard well. He would make his horse scent disappear in the water and simply ride upstream, downstream, or to the bank. He would never find him now. She sat down to catch her breath, rubbing the gritty sand beneath her fingers. Her father's strong, rugged face hovered in her mind as she recalled their last visit to this cove together. A pain crept across her chest. It was familiar. It was sorrow. She missed him. It had been 9 months now, and he had left in such a hurry. Their last words to each other had been harsh. Alva had been angry with him for leaving her stuck here between her smothering mother and domineering uncle. She needed him, but instead of sending him away with the words of love, she had spoken unkindly. Now winters had come, and the men should have been back from their journeys. None of the 30 men who had left with her father for the city of Constantinople had come back. Alva knew he may never return. Cold, full drops of rain landed on her head and ran down her face, mixing with warm tears streaming from her eyes. Rain, that was not good. Rain would wash away the tracks. It would hide the clues. It would disturb the men and her uncle. And she would be missed. Grabbing Fenrir, Alva began the sharp ascent back towards the clearing. The men's voices became louder with every step. "We have to go, Magnus." She heard one of the Carls calling. "It's raining. I've got no dry clothes left at the hall. If this yerking gets sewed, I'll be chilled for the day. And the Jarl will want us to return with news. We've already been too long laboring over this dirt." "One more sample," her uncle replied, his face still pressed close to the ground. Alva rounded the top of the hill in time to see her uncle stand up and place a set of vials in his bag. He looked at her and saw Fenrir cowering behind. "So the wolf is here too, is he? Alva, you and your pet should return home. I must take news of my investigation to Jarl Erik. We shall descend to the village together, and I will deal with you when I get back." Traipsing along in silence, Alva felt her hair getting heavy with rain, water, and the soles of her shoes slipped over the rocks of a giant finger towering behind him. The proud pointed peak of the mountain jutted like a dagger skywards towards Valhalla, home of the gods, as if announcing, "This is the land of Vikings." Alva wanted to get her uncle alone so she could show him the piece of casket, but he strode ahead with the Carls. Partly she felt she had done well to discover it, but deep down Alva knew she should have left the evidence for Magnus to find and inspect. She would be in such trouble for interfering, and as a result, her mother would no doubt wrap her in sodling to prevent her from leaving the house again. As the ground leveled out, the turfed hooves of Kilsgard appeared in the distance. It was still dark, but a few lights were appearing through the town as early risers went to feed animals and begin chores. The group passed through a gateway and saw Megginsalar flicking with light from inside. Magnus made towards it with the Carls, but stopped, turning to Alva. In the half-light of his eyes, looking like glinting jet beads, "You've done a bad thing tonight, girl, to go alone on your investigations. I understand what compels you, but your mother will have to hear of this. You know this will make things even more difficult between us all. First, you will be punished as she sees fit. Then we can talk about whatever it is you'll keep touching in your pouch." She took the slightest glance at her waist, where she had her hand wrapped around the bone fragment. He really did see everything. Alva wound back to the track to her hut, thinking about what she would say when her mother woke. But on opening the door, she realized she wouldn't have to wait till morning. "Alva!" Her mother's pale white skin was etched with lines of worry as she jiggled a red-faced Ivan up and down in the darkness. Brianna reared up, mighty in flame of red hair and flashing green eyes. With a note of sadness beneath her fury, she whispered through gritted teeth, "Daughter, I love you, but your adventurous spirit will be your undoing and the undoing of us all that love you." So what I'd like you to do is, I'd like you to write a summary about what was read, any words that you found difficult, look them up in the dictionary and put up your summary up on Tapestry. Well done for listening and well done for reading along with me.